Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. I'll just say a few words now, but just to wait for more people to come. So let's give 2 more minutes and then we will start for real our nice conversation today with Gerhard and Gianna. Okay, so welcome everyone to this first webinar of a series that Lima Consultancy has planned. This first webinar, we are going to talk about more or less about the Lucas project here for the European Union, about monitoring soil. We are also going to talk about the grass pampas grass, which are a typical environment or biome in Brazil. So today we have a representative from the European Union and a representative from Brazil, both of them researchers that are well known on their field. And the idea about these webinars is actually to connect. So Lima Consultancy has as its core to connect people, to be a bridge between among knowledge, among people, and bringing knowledge to society. So, having this idea in mind, we're going to start this webinar today. So, I'm Claudia, I'm your hostess for today, and we have 2 presenters. So, the first one to give a presentation today is Gerhard, and he is a vegetation ecologist whose research focuses on diversity, dynamics, and management of Brazil's subtropical grasslands on the southern part of the country, uh, which is a very diverse and neglected environment. He's also working on the development and restoration techniques for this type of ecosystems. And today we're going to see a bit of what he's doing, trying to align conservation with sustainability. align conservation with sustainable livestock production. So he's also an active member of the Brazilian Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which is called BPBS, and he coordinates the thematical assessment on agriculture, biodiversity, and ecosystem services group. He is also engaged in external and outreach activities, such as the one we are having today. He has a degree in landscaping planning and a doctoral degree in ecology from the Technical University of Munich in Germany. But since 2011, he is a professor at the Department of Botany of the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. So he is going to start the talk today. Please, we have the Q&A where you can pose questions, share your opinions, your thoughts. And I'm going to pass it up to our presenters. And in the end, we're going to have a round table. Okay? So I will give the floor to Gerhard, and he's going to start his presentation.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Just to check if, okay, thank you. So good morning to everybody who's in Brazil. Good afternoon to everybody who's in Europe. I hope my presentation is also appearing on your screens. Just putting it on full screen here a moment. Everything okay? Okay, thank you. So please, in case of any problems with sound or with the slides, just let me know. So thank you very much, Claudia, for the invitation and for presenting me. So I will be talking about South Brazilian grasslands. So a topic not directly focusing on soil questions. This is not my research focus as well, but of course, sustainable use of ecosystems and land use always has to do with soil. So, and I'm sure we can discuss this later on if anybody wants to go into a bit more detail on the topic. So I will talk about the South Brazilian grassland, and maybe some of the people here, or even many of the people who are watching us, are not familiar with these ecosystems. When we think of Brazil, we usually think of the forest ecosystems. We think of the Amazon forest, we think of the Atlantic forests, and these two ecosystems, of course, are extremely important in the conservation debate. We all know of the role and importance of the Amazon for global climate. We know of the Atlantic forest, which has been severely reduced over the past centuries. Colonization of Brazil started in the Atlantic forest. And of course, the other regions like the Cerrado savannas are also a bit more in the debate than the South Brazilian grasslands, which cover a small portion of this country, where the debate on conservation focuses much more on forests. So I will take you a little bit to the south with some pictures also, and we will discuss a little bit about biodiversity there and about potential then for really align conservation with production, which I think is certainly something that needs to be worked on in all regions of the world. So the first, I will ask you a question. I mean, we're in virtual seminar here, so it's hard to directly interact, but everybody can think a little bit about this question. So where is Brazil's most species-rich square meter? So of course, I'm thinking of plants. I'm a vegetation ecologist, and you all can think. And of course, I'm talking about South Brazilian grasslands. The answer is in the South Brazilian grasslands. I'm showing you here the picture of the very site where we sampled in last fall, European fall in October, Brazilian spring actually, this most species-rich square meter ever found by researchers, which is this square of 1 meter you can see in the picture at the left, where we found 64 different plant species. So different plant species, not plant individuals. And you can see from the pictures, this is on a grassland site with grazing, domestic cattle for livestock production, which is a traditionally important and land use since this very early phases of the European colonization. Cattle was brought to this region by the Jesuit missionaries and then soon dispersed throughout the region. I will show you a map very soon. And until today, livestock grazing is one of the important economic activities in these regions. So we have this extremely biodiverse environment here. I know that for the lay person's eye, it may not seem like it. We don't see too many flowering plants. It's not like what you'd maybe expect from the most species-rich square meter. But it is, you can believe me, we have the data. We will publish it soon, and it's available. So of course, numbers like this, a record of 64 plant species by square meter, it's more to call attention. Of course, it's an important result, but maybe that number by itself does not say if a place is important for conservation or not. But if we take at the region, look at the region as a whole, so just to situate you, we're in the southern part of Brazil, where we have the Pampa region. In Brazil, this would be called the Pampa biome in the Brazilian biome classification. In the very south of the state of Rio Grande do Sul, the southernmost state of Brazil. And we also see here in the map some grassland regions here in orange inserted in the southern part of the Atlantic forest region or Atlantic forest biome. So the southern part of Brazil is dominated in the landscapes by grasslands, and this is actually a transition to the region we call Rio de la Plata grasslands, which is a grassland region that extends through all of Uruguay and to the northeastern part of Argentina. So this is one of the largest grassland regions in South America, which you can see the entire region on this smaller inlay map up there. And so Brazil has one small part of this region, the Pampa, part of the Rio de la Plata grasslands, and then the highland grasslands in the southern part of the Atlantic forest region in the states of Rio Grande do Sul, Santa Catarina, and Paraná, where they limit with the Cerrado savanna region. So if you take any square meter like the one marked here in this picture and look at this grassland, on first impression, one will say, well, there's not too much diversity here. We can't see many flowering plants. There are some tall grasses and there's some prostrate creeping grasses. But at closer look, when researchers go to the field, we will find typically between 20 to 35 plant species per square meter, sometimes more than 50. I showed you our record result. And up here on the slide, you can see just some examples of the beautiful flora, which of course, not everything can flower all the time. Not everything flowers together. We have a climate here, subtropical, with a colder winter, but very long vegetation season. So it's not like in Central Europe where there will be high synchrony in flowering. And of course, this plant diversity is habitat for a high diversity fauna as well, thinking of insects, very many groups, but also mammals, birds that need also this heterogeneous structure of the grassland. And of course, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, this vegetation is also the basis for important ecosystem services that basically are a result of the ecosystem of vegetation as well. And here just to show you some impressions, also of the landscapes in the region. So when one thinks of a grassland, one thinks of grasses, but there's many types of grassland around the world, but even in a small region like southern Brazil. So the Pampa region, this Pampa biome, only occupies 2.3% of the surface of Brazil. And you see this huge diversity of landscapes. All of them have one thing in common. They are dominated by grasses, grasslands, and of course other species that make part of it, from the Asteraceae family, Cyperaceae, legumes, but mostly the main characteristic is the dominance of grasslands. There can be trees in the landscapes as well, in different situations of the landscape in terms of topography, but we don't have true savannas like you would find in central Brazil or in Africa and Australia, like under real tropical climate. And just to finish up this first part in biodiversity, so I work on plants, and we'll talk a little bit more about plants always, of course, but we did a synthesis of the total biodiversity, total known biodiversity of this South Brazilian grasslands in the Pampa region, and we found more than 12,000 species. This is just putting together species lists on the different species groups. You see the plants on the left and on top in green, then the different animal group in blue, and on the right we see mosses, and we also see algae. And well, you can go into detail. We have this all published as well. So we see that in this small region of the country, we have an enormous biodiversity, which corresponds to more or less 9% of what's available in species list or easily accessible in species list for all of Brazil. So this small region of the country dominated by grasslands has an enormous biodiversity. On the other hand, this is not much recognized in conservation policy. So here I just show you some clippings of some papers on this topic. Research on these grasslands is rather recent. So I would say for about 20 years, people have been really doing more research. So maybe grassland ecology as a science in this region has started only 20 years ago. And as you see on the left side, those of you who read Portuguese, Riqueza Oculta no Sul, this is from a newspaper where based on one of these results on high diversity on the plot scale, on our sampling unit scale, some journalists put together this article to show to the people living in the south about this enormous biodiversity, which is really not known, which is oculta, which is neglected, which is hidden from the eye of the people, from the mind of the people, and then also from policy. And if we look at the conservation state and on land use, we see that this entire region, the Campos Solinos, the South Brazilian grasslands, lost more than 1/3 of their original extents over the past 35 years. So this is the region with very fast land use change. So this is for the Campos Solinos regions as a whole, which includes the Pampa and the highland grasslands. Sometimes I have data just for the Pampa region, depends a bit. I'm sorry, I apologize. I will be shifting sometimes from the Pampa to the Campos Solinos, but basically we can just say South Brazilian grasslands, including the Pampa, but this data here is then for this whole region, not only for the Pampa. So we have this enormous land use change, and this is the recent land use change. And the Pampa biome, so now only using part of this region on this map, actually is the region with the highest rate of loss of natural vegetation over the past 38 years. So in Brazil, we use very much the data by map biomas, and they each year bring out an infographic for each Brazilian region, each Brazilian biome. And so we have this very a clear indication that the Pampa is really the regions with the highest loss of native vegetation. We also have high loss of native vegetation in the Atlantic forest region, so the northern part of the Campos Solinos. But the data is not so easily available, so one would have to go to the map biomas database and just do a synthesis of this to get this data isolated. But here, just to illustrate, this is also a region where we have had high losses of grassland vegetation, in particular in Paraná state, where there's very small fragments left, a bit more in Santa Catarina and in Rio Grande do Sul. And additionally, this region is very poorly covered by protected areas. So in this map here for the Pampa region now, we see the distribution and extension of protected areas. We have these two main categories, strict protection and sustainable use areas. We see the strict protection areas cover a very small part of the total area and are mostly restricted to the coastal region or closer to the coastal region. We have 2 large sustainable use protected areas, but altogether, this is just a bit more than 3% of the region, which is, of course, not sufficient to protect all this diversity of landscape as well. So we have a conservation problem in this region, and overall, and we've discussed this in a paper already in 2015, if we take together this data on land use change on the one hand and protected areas on the other side and calculate this so-called conservation risk index, the Pampa region appears as the Brazilian region or Brazilian biome with the highest threat level. And this clearly is not reflected in the national or international conservation debate. Because, of course, the high importance that's given to the Amazon, which is a lot larger in spatial extent, so no doubt about the need to preserve and restore the Amazon and the Atlantic forest as well, but we should also look at the smaller Pampa regions. Actually, one should look at all biomes in the same way in terms of need to protect. So the question is, when we start about protection and conservation of the Pampa and the South Brazilian grassland, the question is what maintains these grasslands and their biodiversity? And this question is actually very easy to answer. Of course, biodiversity is a consequence of many different features of climate, of soil diversity, of landscape diversity, of evolutionary processes. But what maintains this biodiversity is cattle. And this is an interesting point, of course, because cattle usually, when we talk of conservation, is considered to be a problem. In forest environments, cattle is a problem. They impede regeneration of the forest. When we think about the Amazon, we discuss the problem of loss of forest and transformation into pasture for cattle raising and for beef production. And of course, we discuss the question of emissions of greenhouse gases by cattle. But in southern Brazil, it's these guys here, the domestic cattle, mostly cows, but they can also be sheep, horses, that maintain the grasslands and their biodiversity. And this is the unifying element besides grasses over all these grassland landscapes in the regions. This is all grazed by domestic cattle. And why does cattle maintain vegetation? I won't go into much of the detail here, but if anybody's interested, you can get in touch with me later. I can send you more literature on that. We have several studies who show, when we have data, that cattle is important to maintain biodiversity. But basically, we have to go back into the vegetation history of this region and into the evolutionary history of the species. Summing up in one phrase, the plants of the South Brazilian grasslands are adapted to fire and grazing. So we know from paleoecological data of different types, fossil data, but also pollen data, so over data from different time spans as well, that in the past, this region was grazed by native grazer. So there was a native megafauna in South America, and especially in southern South America, where we are situated here, with a very different species group. I just show you 2 examples here, the picture of the mammoth or elephant-like animals, and then the book cover of fossil horses of South America. So there were even horses here, very similar to today's horses. And of course, there was also fire in grassland environments. Under productive climatic conditions, we usually have fire. So we have paleoecological data on that. And these animals became extinct about 12,000 years ago, more or less coinciding with the period of first human colonization in this region. Then fires went up in frequency. And then about 500 years ago, cattle was introduced into the region again, and in a way took up again the role of the grazing animals. So this is really summing up very shortly because of the lack of time we have here, but I will be very happy to give you more details on that. But basically, we can say that these grasslands here are adapted to grazing and fires. And of course, grazing in terms of land use management is the more important and more interesting issue to talk about. So basically, based on the ecology of the system, we can say that these grasslands have a vocation for cattle grazing on native grasslands. We have a diversity of forage plant, many good forage species. We can graze all year round, of course, with a more limited forage supply in winter, which will require some adjustment, of course, in terms of management. And in this environment, we can produce beef or other products of very high quality. And this also maintains the native biodiversity, of course, following some rules in terms of grazing pressure and everything. I also won't go into much detail on that. Of course, you can overgraze, you can damage the environment and damage diversity if grazing is not conducted adequately. But as a general rule, we can say these grasslands are an ideal environment to produce beef and other projects using native biodiversity, which is the large difference to the cattle raising over the rest of the country. Most parts of the country, let's say it like that. The Pantanal also has much of cattle raising on native grasslands and native savannas, but most of the cattle raising in Brazil is on planted pasture, using exotic forage species and not native biodiversity. So this actually places southern Brazil in a very unique position to be able to produce high quality products conserving native biodiversity. And I also don't want to go into much detail here, but of course there's many colleagues from the agricultural sciences who work on the management part, the applied part, the production parts of this, and they show how better management, so this is based on knowledge basically, can increase productivity. Of course, you will be able, we can discuss that sometimes we can fertilize these grasslands, we can insert some additional species, especially winter species. In winter, the biomass productivity is a bit lower, so that's a problem. And we can improve these grasslands a bit, but we will still stay for a very long time and with high productivity levels on the native grassland, and not changing the system from a natural grassland with native species to a planted artificial system. And so we need knowledge to do this. The farmer needs knowledge to do this, and we will be able to have a economically very interesting situation here. Of course, grasslands produce even more. So we could talk about the direct production in terms of kilos of meat produced per hectare. But we all know that all ecosystems provide ecosystem services. Here, this is just an illustration to show this. We have other provisioning services beyond the forage and livestock production ecosystems, and this goes for grasslands as well, produce water, our habitat, produce materials. There's many interesting examples in the region. They contribute to regulation of the environment, carbon sequestration, erosion control, water flow regulation, etc. And of course, there's the cultural aspect. And many of you may know that the Gaucho culture, which is iconic in the region here and in Uruguay, Argentina, this does not exist without grasslands. And just very briefly, before I come to an end here, on the grassland services, we unfortunately still don't have much data for this region here. So we do have some studies, but some of our knowledge, and of course, comes from international publications, but we are using this information now also to design studies here to get the data from our own environments. So on carbon, I can't present too much detailed data here on our grasslands, but we have first studies out, and it's important to know that 1/3 of the global terrestrial carbon stocks are in grasslands. So these ecosystems are extremely important for global carbon cycles, and we have first studies underway that look at the, or already published, already finished, that look at the balance of these ecosystems under grazing, and these studies show that it's possible to manage grassland in the way that they are in a carbon sink, even with grazing and considering the emissions by the cows. So this is a question of management, because we will store carbon in the soil. The vegetation, of course, is important for pollination, and we have few available data on that, but here just to show you some numbers where we compare the number of species with floral resources, so with resources for pollinating organisms that then will be important for agriculture. And of course, in a native grassland, the number of species and thus the diversity of resources is much more than in other land uses. We have the impact of land use change on water cycles. And so there's the study here that shows how soybean in comparison to grassland increases surface runoff, while in grassland percolation is increased and evapotranspiration. Sorry, there's sometimes Portuguese terms on my slides. And so basically in these studies, they come to the conclusion that the substitution of natural grasslands by crops influences water fluxes in rivers, increasing peak levels and consequently risks of flooding. And some of you may have heard of or seen the floods we had here in southern Brazil last May, which extreme flooding events. And of course, these issues, land use, extreme climate events through climate change, are related. So we need to work on land management that helps us with water cycle regulation to avoid extreme events. And then we, of course, have the Gaúcho culture, just to illustrate this by the slide here, which is also an important ecosystem service and very much connected to the identity of the local people here. So to sum it up, grassland landscapes, and these are, as I showed, productive landscapes, provide multiple ecosystem services, a high landscape multifunctionality, and resilience, a higher resilience to extreme weather events, and allow us to produce in a way that is compatible with biodiversity conservation. So the landscape on the bottom right is intact because of cattle grazing and because of livestock production. Whereas agricultural landscapes, of course, there's no doubt we need agriculture and we need production, but we usually focus on a single ecosystem service production. We have a lower landscape functionality, a lower resilience to extreme weather events, and we have the problem of degradation of native remnants. So we need a better organization in space and maintain intact remnants of native grasslands, and these can be economically very interesting. So what are measures? This is a bit more related now to policy, especially here in Brazil, but of course also European policy influences this very much. So sustainable grazing management needs much higher recognition as a fundamental basis for ecosystem conservation. And this is important to bring this topic into conservation policy that often is a bit biased towards forests, at least in Brazil it is, but also in the international debate. So we need to broaden a bit this view. We need public policies to support grazing on natural grasslands, especially family farming. We need a true implementation of conservation law in the South Brazilian grassland region. Of course, Brazil has a very detailed conservation environmental legislation, but we do see implementation problems in relation to the rural registry, in relation to licensing of land use change, where we need more detailed and better regulations. And we need development of ecological restoration of grasslands in Brazil. I can talk more about this in case you're interested, but at the moment, there is basically still no restoration of grasslands in southern Brazil. So this is virtually inexistent. We can't buy the seeds we need. So we are doing a lot of research on that matter, developing techniques to restore these grasslands. And overall, we can say that natural grassland and extensive grazing are solutions in times of climate change. And one thing I would, ending here my presentation, I would like to point out that I think all of us that are interested in conservation need to be very careful when we discuss conservation-related issues that we use an inclusive terminology that helps us to discuss all types of ecosystems. Like, for instance, in Brazil, the law, the most important law on nature conservation is the law on protection of native vegetation, Lei da Proteção da Vegetação Nativa, but everybody calls it the Forest Code, Código Florestal. This is what everybody discusses, and in the news you only read the Forest Code. But this term by itself gives the impression that a forest is to be protected and other ecosystems are not that important. So we have a small opinion paper on this issue, and when we discuss on an international basis a policy like European, Brazilian policy, and we talk about environmental problems, we need to broaden the terminology. So we talk a lot about deforestation. So when you see the landscape down there where grassland was transformed into a plantation, into crops, this is not deforestation. So when we talk about these statistics, we need to broaden our mind, and we need to see that in Brazil there's more than deforestation. There's suppression of other types of vegetation that can be very important and in terms of conservation, but also very promising in terms of sustainable production. So this is what I would like to ask all of you to consider in the future. Let's try to use a terminology in conservation that includes all types of ecosystems, including these species-rich grasslands in Brazil. And I end with this. Thank you very much, and I will be very happy to discuss with you any details and any questions, any points you're interested in. Thank you.
Yes. So, wow. I'm a bit flabbergasted still because I'm Brazilian, as most of you know, and cattle and conservation. These are two words that you don't see walking together. And quite happy to see how you went back to the past to get the history of occupation in that region. And when I say occupation, I'm also talking about the natural occupation. So you had herds there grazing in the past um, that were before them the grass and the biodiversity, the local biodiversity, was controlled by fire, followed by cattle, now humans and cattle. So that is something very special for and on top of all of it you have the gaucho culture, and you want to put all of this mix in the perspective of conservation. Nothing mix here when you talk about conservation. Can you just talk a bit about it, and then I will, it's just to get a bit the talk going, but then I'll pass to Gianna. I'll present her, and in the end, we're going to have a round table with Q&A, and I will open the microphone and the camera for everyone, okay? So could you comment a bit on it?
Yes, thank you. Of course, I did a very short presentation here. There was not time for any details. It would be interesting to go into more detail, especially into this evolutionary history of the species we have here and the past climate history. Of course, this is all related to diversity. Diversity is a result of the processes in the past over different timescales. But yes, we have these ecosystems. They developed with the presence of grazing animals, and also with the presence of fire. There's also still a lot of open questions. So of course I'm simplifying this a little bit, but in general we can say this: yes, these grasslands, they need grazing or fire. This is actually something that holds true for all grasslands under productive climate conditions. So all grasslands except in the Arctic region, the tundra grasslands or the very high altitude grasslands. Everybody who goes to the mountains from time to time knows that you have this vegetation zonation, and only at a very upper level you will have non-forest vegetation. Naturally, you would have forest, but naturally, that's important, also should include the presence of animals when they are drivers, or even the presence of fire, like in the savannas. We all know fire is a natural process. And at the other hand, these processes like grazing and fire, they're also problems without a doubt. They can be very problematic when they're not well conducted. But from a scientific perspective, we first must understand them as a process that's there. And talking about fire, which is not the big issue here in this region, just the bigger issue in the Cerrado savanna or in other savanna regions, we have seen in the past years, of course, an increase, or past decades, an increase in fire frequency. And this is going through the media a lot because one sees this. The Brazilians here, we all, basically all, across the country felt the impacts of vegetation fires last year when there was smoke all over the country. And this is, of course, related to land management, but also to climate change. And so we can learn how to manage ecosystems, for instance, by grazing, also to reduce fuel loads, to reduce fire. Of course, these are very complex issues in management. There's no simple solution that fits all, no, right? But we need this integrated debate on vegetation management, climate. Of course, land use change influencing climate change. And in the past year, we here in southern Brazil, we went through this extreme flood event, which was catastrophic, something this region has never seen, extremely high volumes of rainfall. And then a few months later, we had this problem of smoke coming from central Brazil down here. And we've had a very prolonged dry spells also in this region, which is very complicated, of course, for agricultural production. So we are really feeling climate change here. And this is related to land use pattern. And we have to think, of course, how to reduce climate change, but I think also on how to turn our land use more resilient. And then grassland comes in again as a production strategy that even in a dry year will maintain some productivity and will maintain its biodiversity. So overall resilience of land use, I think, is becoming a very important topic all around the world. And this region has, I think, this wonderful situation that we can produce maintaining native biodiversity, which is something really rare. And when we talk about the Brazilian situation, I have a colleague who always says it's so weird. We have the forest in the north and we cut it down to plant grasses and raise cattle. And here in the south, we have the grasslands and we plant them up with pine and eucalypt trees. So it's an inverted world. And of course, these are complicated issues because this involves private property and everything. But we really need to strive on to ways to find more intelligent ways to manage our land and maintain our natural resources. And here I think we have this great possibility. And restoration, of course, is becoming a very big topic. I didn't talk much about the restoration goals, but Brazil, the national government, has very challenging restoration objectives. So in the pampa alone, the objective is to restore 300,000 hectares, but at the moment we don't have the technology to do so. So this is another field that's extremely important, where most people will have heard or thought about forest. When we talk about restoration, we think about planting trees, right? This is not adequate for this region here. Of course, we need to plant grasses and other species, and this is even actually more complicated. So that's another part of it. Most people will say that as an ecosystem, a grassland is more simpler than a forest because it's smaller. But this may not be true. It's a matter of scale. And there's a lot of complexity in grasslands. And we always, and coming back to this key message maybe of my presentation, we always need to think about grassland management. Grasslands and savannas are systems that need what as an ecologist we call disturbance, but which is in a broader context maybe not the best term because it's something negative. But as an ecologist, the disturbance is the removal of biomass by fire, by grazing. So these processes that in any forest in Brazil will be considered a degradation that we will take out and that often people in conservation consider to be a problem, for these grass-dominated systems, actually, they're very, very important.
Yeah, so Jenna has raised hand.
Yeah, I would like to make a question. I've worked a lot of time on burnt areas, but more on the aftermath of forest fires, let's say like that. Wildfires in general, also in other areas. And this brought me to a conversation and to a very big discussion we had between several scientists on the ecosystem services provision by wildfire for species that are highly dependent on the recurrence of fire. And but in reality, the society sees it as a threat, and it's a very particular issue to address in conservation. Or let's say in restoration actions, that you have to admit you need prescribed fire or a certain level of fire occurrence for the healthiness of this habitat. I wonder if in Brazil this is all also perceived that way. And another thing on the cattle thing, issue discussion, let's say like that, we in Europe started using more and more, going back to the past, on the usage of animals for the reduction of fuel load in forests and landscapes, also as a way to reduce fuel in this case, and also give some support minimizing mega fires, which is the current issue we have right now, that is quite problematic and a little bit on the wave of this production forest and forest cultures to get pulp material for paper and so on and so forth, that became quite disseminated in the south of Europe. But yeah, I would like to understand if in Brazil fire is seen in the same way, and how about these novel ways of approaching restoration. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. Yeah, I would say in Brazil there is going on a change in the perception of fire, at least in fire management authorities and conservation authorities. So there had been for a very long time a no fire policy in conservation. So fire was considered as a problem, and when there was a fire in the conservation unit, it was taken out. And even in systems where fires were natural, they were not allowed to occur. But then there were, of course, what had to happen where catastrophic fire went. So people started to learn, well, fire does make part of these systems, and we're not able to conserve these systems without fire. So now the National Conservation Agency, ICMBio, they have this integrated fire management schemes, Manejo Integrado do Fogo, which involves working with fire. This does not say that there will always be prescribed fires, but this is exactly this discussion of evaluating fuel loads, evaluating fire risks, thinking of when fires would be beneficial, and then conduct them in a safe way to avoid large uncontrolled wildfires, which we have seen. So this has been clear in Brazil as well over the past years. We've had some years with extreme events. In the Pantanal, I'm not sure if it was 2020 or 21, something like that. 1/3 of the entire Pantanal region burned in an extremely dry year. So we are, I think, aware, and conservation managers are aware of the fact that we need to work with fire. And if there's biomass, ecosystems will burn. So we may be working harder to control biomass levels. And then there's the point that grazing can even contribute with this. But of course, in the general debate, in the public remains, I think, this vision: fire is a huge problem. And of course, it's shocking to see large fires, but then for who knows a bit about this environment and sees the regeneration, and yes, there are many species that are dependent on fires. But of course, so yeah, I think it's a very interesting debate, the fire as an ecosystem service, which is something that will seem to be very weird for many people on the first place. But yes, there's environments where fire has an important role. And we learn, of course, we need to learn and do research on how to manage fires in the way that they are not harmful to humans and to human assets. Human health is an important question, and there's conflicts here, of course, as well. So I think in Brazil there is a change in the debate, at least in academia and in nature conservation circles, not so much maybe in the public. And here in the pampa, actually, fire is not that big a problem. But this has to do, I would say, with the fact that everything is grazed. You will have difficulties to find grasslands here without cattle, unless you're in a conservation unit where things may be differently, and where this can be, in my view, a problem. Because if you don't have grazing and you don't have fire, you will lose the grasslands. It's a question of time. I mean, there will be some process of shrub encroachment and ultimately forest succession if you don't have these processes going on. But there may be catastrophic fires. So I think this is even in Brazil under climate change scenarios, and we are seeing climate changing here. And we are seeing more fire winds. We need to think more about how to manage fire, even in this region where fire is not that big an issue.
Okay. So thank you a lot for this nice talk, Gerhard. Now I'm going to give the floor to Gianna. I'm going to present her. As you can see, our program is not it's not flowing anymore. So I will go for Gianna presentation, and then we can have a 5 minutes break, and then we come back with the Q&A. What do you think? So I'm going to talk a bit about Gianna now, and let me put her on the spotlight. So Gianna is an environmental engineer with focus on soil health, more specifically on soil erosion and soil pollution. She has dedicated most of her time to monitoring burned areas and understanding the underlying key process in fire-affected soils and landscapes to better adjust models to burned conditions. So as you can see, there is a bridge between the sciences here. It was not meant to be, but it's there. That's good. So while she was in Portugal doing her studies, her most impactful achievement was the creation of the post-fire erosion risk map for the post-fire land management decision-making. Currently, she works at the European Soil Observatory, and she is dedicated to large-scale post-fire soil erosion modeling, land degradation, health soils, and the assessment phase and remediation of soil pollution in the European Union. She also likes to dedicate her time to knowledge transference, which is what we are doing here today, and strongly believe that art and technology should go hand in hand. And to finalize, she is a fervent advocate for equity and diversity. So now the floor is yours, Gianna.
Thank you so much. So, that is a very long description, but I'll try to keep it brief. Well, I would like to tell you a little bit today of the latest developments we had at the EU level that I think are worthy to look at, especially because we are very often an example on the legislation. And I want to bring this idea and this base concept that we have in here, that our policies have based on science, and that is why I work in a European institution in order to be able to provide advisory on the policy making. So I work in the European Commission, and we have a research center called Joint Research Center, combined by all the member states, and I work in a specific team of the EU Soil Observatory. Let me move. So here is a small snapshot of what my team does, what we do at the European level. And I just want to bring this idea that we have several flows of knowledge going into several key aspects of our society. So we are the EU Soil Observatory, and we develop knowledge for soil policy. We can contribute to individual legislation that are ongoing now, and also we contribute with the collection of the widest soil data in this planet, let's say like that. We assess soil health at the European scale. We compile all the data and share it. We are the biggest provider of soil health that you can find, and we have a forum where everybody is invited to join, called the EUSO Stakeholder Forum, where we try to get together and try to talk about soil and engaging citizens with us. Let's see. All right, this is us. We are a lot. It's important to be a lot because the knowledge developed here is developed by a lot of people with different expert background. And it's important to also be able to retain past knowledge and create future knowledge. We have a repository that is one of the most used at the EU level from the Commission, is one of the sites that are more visited, where we have data retrieval and requests from all over the world, and we all contribute to that in different ways. And we approach healthy soils. Healthy soils have been a term that have been launched more recently. Before, I don't know if people were used to, we would talk about more quality. We tried to get away, not to say that soil quality was not okay, but we tried to get away a little bit to healthy soil, so that every citizen could look at it in a perspective of going to the doctor. You, let's say you don't feel so well, but you still function, right? You can go to the doctor and say, I only hurt a little bit my hand and everything, but I can still do all the other things I do in my daily life, because soils like us do provide a lot of ecosystem services that before was also called very frequently soil functions. They are the same, and their existence basically contributes to our daily life. I don't think I need to say it, be very redundant here, because I understand most of you know the ecosystem services provided by soil, but the most simple one of provision of food, which is an issue currently of food security, needs to be kept. We need to have some independence, also need to be able to provide healthy food, and that can also only be achieved by having healthy soils, as also tackling several issues of climate change, such as extreme events or flooding control, all the amount of marvelous things that soils can do for us. Okay, but unfortunately, We are not perfect. We all know we have several issues ongoing in this world. Most of them are caused by us. And we are doing several, we are pushing for several degradation threats that can change from soil erosion to nutrient imbalance to loss of biodiversity, which seems to be more and more concerning by day. Pollution, compaction, waterlogging, that will affect our soils significantly. And this was one of the motivations for one proposal for which we contributed and recently has been evaluated and pushed forward. So it's true. It seems that we are going to have a directive for soil monitoring in Europe, and that aims to identify areas where the soils were more degraded or there was more healthy soils that need more preservation. We need to restore degraded areas. We need to know in which place we are standing here at the EU level so that we actually can tackle the expected changes in climate, especially in what concerns the capacity of soils to, let's say, resist to extreme conditions, and they can be either drought and flooding in the same location. But at the time when we launched this, we have a rough idea how was the degradation of soils, and we didn't know very well precisely where are the healthy and unhealthy soils in EU. And this became one of the things we started to do a long time ago, since 2009, but was culminated in the 2022, where we gathered all the information we had about soils towards the soil health. And that starts with Lucas. Lucas is, for the people that don't know, it was a program designed for the assessment of land use and land cover in Europe. It's despite a lot of things are done today with the satellite imagery, you need field validation, you need to go to the sites and verify that. Within Lucas, that is managed through ESTAT, the Statistical Office, we have the soil module. And the soil module basically started in 2009 with a few points, but we are now, the last Lucas was done in 2022, where we have 41,000 locations in which we collect soil samples, and we measure a bunch of things, but basically we try to assess from soil biodiversity, soil properties, landscape features also, together with the other data that is collected in Lucas, soil chemical physical and chemical properties, because there's a lot of going on there, and also some pollutants. It's not ideal. Was initially produced and created for a land use of cropland in its majority, but we need to eventually expand to other land use types so we can get a better idea of the total of the EU soils, not only the agricultural lands. Basically, in all these 40,000 points, we have a surveyor or a team of surveyors that go to these places, take soil samples at different heights or depths in this case, and also take a composite sample. And we have just the basic approach for soil sampling, in which recently, because of microplastics, we have been considering these plastic bags and ties for this sample, the collection of some soil samplings from now on, to take into consideration cross-contamination. This also shows that this is a survey that evolves with time, with the novelty, with the science, and that we have more and more concerns, and that methodologically always improve. And so what do? We collect this huge amount of samples. Some samples are taken with a bulk density ring, other samples are frozen for biodiversity biology assessment, and other samples are just simple air-dried samples. They are all shipped to Ispra, to Italy. We manage them, and then we send them to laboratories so they can performed an analysis on all the samples that will be under that analysis. This means it's always the same laboratory that does the physical and chemical properties. It's always the same laboratory that does the pesticide residue analysis, and so on and so forth. So this reduces the amount of error, and we can compare between member states that have their autonomy, but we don't have a border issue that is generally the most difficult issue when comparing data from different countries. And so we ship the things into different laboratories depending on the expertise, and then we have the data, we do a data quality assessment, and we prepare our data sets. Generally speaking, we only publish data after peer review publications, and basically only after acceptance of the scientific grounds for which those publications, those maps were created. Only then, when it's accepted and published, we put it in our repository in ESDAC, and we provide it for the entire world to use. And basically, it's because we already had several surveys since 2009, we have in some issues a kind of temporal assessment, which is highly relevant when you're trying to assess the trends of degradation. We also have some assessments and spatially explicit maps created for pollution, but pollution is beyond any doubt the most challenging issue we have in Lucas. Also because we use for the data collection of our samples private owner land, and the disclosure of much of this data cannot be done. So we have several issues of privacy, but still we aim to provide the state of affairs in terms of pollution, and I think we are going into the right track. We are going in the right way, and we hope in the future this can be shared fully with all the data sets that we have in ESDAC. We also compare the values that we obtained in the field, in the soil, with the limit values of some legislation. And for instance, we have a directive on the sewage sludge application that in fact identify that several of these these sites that were visited and where we have samples of those, that the values were above the limit values set by these directives. So this is an assessment not only at the environmental level, but also on the efficiency of these policies, okay? Other things we can suggest is also details on the phosphorus budget, because it's such a difficult resource to obtain, and it has been raw material with high importance also for productivity, but also compare what we observe in situ on the pesticide residue with the list of authorized products for application. We don't use directly some of these values, but we don't use these values are also used indirectly for the assessment of soil erosion through the input values that are required to assess land degradation and soil erosion, and they are fundamental to have a better perspective of the measures and the mitigation, or the soil conservation measures that are applied. And actually there was some progress on that matter through time. And finally, the most the most requested indicators on soil biodiversity, we had an exploratory a pilot study on soil biodiversity indicators and development with the DNA, and actually I'm not an expert in this matter. I cannot answer much. Can forward you to my colleagues, but this also was very challenging on the sense that you have a mixture of variables that affect soil biodiversity, and it's quite difficult to be able to link if the main cause of degradation is pollution, if it's land management, if it's tillage, it's really, really complicated, but with time we are progressing on that matter. And one of the most discussed issue, which is soil organic carbon losses that actually were assessed between 2009 and 2018, because we have the ambition to be a carbon neutral continent, and we have seen that it's been quite difficult to have a progress on this matter, and we could build upon these results some scenarios where we could be more efficient if we use land use changes in our favor, like for instance changing agricultural lands to grasslands, for instance. That was one of the scenarios, several, not all of them, but the most degraded ones into grasslands, and it seems that we could achieve a good progress on the keeping soil organic carbon that way. And we do all this science, we use all this science to advise policy, but we also aim to advise the citizens for them to be aware. Soil is not something that is very appealing for most of the people. Sometimes we have to remind people that it's thanks to soil we have most of our food, and it's very tricky how there was an under funding, let's say, during so many years on soil matters, that now we realize that we need to be able to keep up the pace. We need to invest much more. So we have the EU soil degradation dashboard that can answer to this initial question that I posed to you: where are our healthy and healthy soils? And here you will be able to see where are the areas under higher pressure, or which soil degradation aspects, how they relate with each other, and even individualized by soil degradation indicators. You can have a good vision of our continent in what concerns degradation processes. This means, imagine that you can have between 0 or not knowing what is there, to areas that can have several 8 degradation processes simultaneously. So this means that there's a higher likelihood that this area is degraded than this one. The scale is very big. You have to realize that we cannot say this exactly point is a key point. However, this tool can allow you to have a perspective of your member state, of the land use, that it seems to have higher degradation rates according to the information we know. You can go by member state. You can see how you relate with the other member states in terms of perspective. You can relate soil degradation indicators altogether, and you can have information for a decision, which is sometimes what is missing here. The base of our approach, we call it convergence of evidence, is that we have all these layers of information all together, and we overlap all together to see the increase or not likelihood of having a degraded area, an area that needs attention for what will be the upcoming soil monitoring law. In fact, when we contributed to the impact assessment, I'll give you here the example of the country I know the most. Yeah, we provided with less indicators by then, now we have much more indicators, a set of indicators showing the level of degradation, for instance, for Portugal. And this is a sum of the soil erosion plus soil organic loss of soil organic carbon, substitution for compaction, and nitrogen excess, for instance, that we had in our modeling, in our sampling, and we had all the knowledge together. For instance, this layer has high level of uncertainty, but now, this was in 2022, now it was already replaced by a novel indicator with much more updated data, and that will give even further information for the decision making. And because we are so close of the decision making, we are able to provide this information in the most updated form. Currently, for instance, me and my colleagues are working in the procedure to create a watch list of substances and a guidance for member states know how to tackle soil pollution in their country, because here comes the other part of EU, which is we have a highly diverse cultural, soil, environment all over Europe, and the same list of pollutants that can be applied for assessment in Portugal might not be the same that it's applied, I don't know, in France, in Germany, because we also have different stories, a different background, and we need to approach this according to the information we know. It's very, very demanding and challenging, but we believe we are going in the right way. I have only a couple of slides more, a little bit delayed, but I wanted to just deliver these take-home messages. So Lucas' survey has been pivotal for the soil monitoring law. We only have a soil monitoring law, and we did an impact assessment of that law because there was already data that could provide us a suspicious evidences that we had problems. And we provided the data, we provided the assessments, we pushed for developments in research, and then we provided the dashboard to inform everybody, citizens, policymaking, scientists, and land management. So here was the culmination of all this work during several years that arrived to this point. And then there's another thing. We are completely aware that this is a continuous development. We should not start now. We need to develop better indicators, and when they are ready, they will be replaced by those ones that are more uncertain, more fragile. They are not so complete. We have improved methodology. Lucas, for soil pollution in 2009 for the assessment of metals, was made for a total concentration of metals, and now to keep and compare with the ones from 2009 is going to have total concentration and also try to assess the bioavailable fraction in order to get a better idea what actually is there. So the whole survey also evolves with the development of science. But still, this is not perfect. There are many gaps. We still struggle with pollution. We struggle a lot with biodiversity, and we have a strong bias to agricultural lands that we need to address. We need more forests, more semi-natural, more urban areas in our assessment so we can respond to these policy demands in a better way. And finally, our last assessment before, I think it's 62 currently, and this is an old indicator that I kept because it was created by the other artist. We have approximately 62 of unhealthy soils in EU. This is really showing evidences that we need to act. And thanks to our approach and our work, we were able to identify areas with under various processes of degradation occurring simultaneously that show us that at least we have a high certainty that these areas need to be addressed for restoration. In the end, the implementation of a monitoring system in the EU, like Lucas, required a significant investment, but the payback, it was evident that having an harmonized monitoring system throughout all member states was fundamental for a good assessment and to have a better vision of what is going on in the EU soils. So I finished now. I leave this slide for later if you want to share the slides for contact. And I ask Claudia to pick up the rest of the, let me see, I still have this screen. Okay. Let me know.
Wow.
A lot of things, I know. Sorry.
No, it's just like it was, okay. Thank you. It was a very informative talk also. Uh, for those that were not and are not aware of the soil monitoring law that became a directive, and it's not called monitoring law anymore, but the name is sticky, so we continue to refer it as the soil law. It's a very controversial legislation that we're trying to pass finally here in Europe. It needs to have a lot of big stakeholders on the table, which are the member states, to agree to all the parts of the legislation. And the legislation is divided mostly in three focal parts from my way of viewing it, which is the biodiversity, which is the land taking, and the monitoring. So you have three different aspects, and some member states are okay with the parts of it, but not with the others. And then you have a puzzle that you need to put together to get this legislation to be implemented. So it was quite interesting to see the whole history behind it, because yeah, when you participate in a process but you're not there since the beginning, it's you are just focused on some points. In my case, biodiversity. So it was very good to have all the background. I remember when Lucas' project was published, and it was a buzz. Everybody was talking about this project. And at the time, I could not envisage what it would become. Could you talk about it, your opinion also on this, from where it began to where it is now?
Well, that actually it's a very long story, and also needs I need to refer here the name of Luca Montanarella, that actually is a great participator in FAO. That was one of the persons that, among many, okay, this is a teamwork, a team effort, that had a very good vision in our team to show that only with monitoring data we could actually assess the issue. We were very, very certain, the scientific community in general, that we had problems of soil, of landscape, of provision, of ecosystem services, but only with that this could be possible. Of course, only an institution like EU has the capacity to implement such a thing. And it actually started slow and small, with not so many points, with many obstacles, because not all the member states were convinced that this would be a need, and also that there are other member states that also think that we don't need another monitoring because we already have a monitoring that fits our needs. So this is a very big discussion, but I admire the vision for this monitoring, and to be a stepping stone for the development of this law. This law was not the first time it was attempted to be implemented. There's an history of that also. We believe that we are in the right process because we are talking about also resource that a lot of people use, and it's quite controversial in terms of when you talk about land ownership. You know, this is also was the same when I was addressing post-fire impacts. It's very difficult for you to convince a landowner that to show him that these things need to be addressed, and there's a life of this soil beyond his life. It's very difficult, and the effect of his land throughout the entire ecosystem is bigger than most of the people think, which is a very tricky and difficult thing to pass. But yeah, I would say that the leaders of this team were very visionary, and the amount of work that we have been done have been fundamental for this progress to happen.
Yeah, very nice. So again, there is a bridge between the work that you two perform, because it's the private ownership of land that needs to be monitored, and then that you need to reach out towards these people, and it's very complicated. Do you want to make a insert here, Gerhard?
Well, sorry, I had some problems with the microphone. So thanks, first of all, Gianna, for this great talk. I, of course, am not a specialist on soil issues, so I did not know this platform. Now I know it. And as a scientist, of course, this is wonderful to have. I really appreciate you explaining the first part about the building, how they get the data together, because this is so important, especially in soil, of course, that it's really done with one standard processing in one lab. We all know we have this data out there and we can't use all of it. And I will be sure to pass this to some colleagues I collaborate with in soil sciences about a soil-related question here, and I'm sure they'll also find it very interesting. So thanks, it was a great talk. And about this point, yeah, I think this is a very important question. So when Gianna asked me about the question of fire management, I mentioned how this is changing here, and then I was referring to the government authorities, the national or state level agencies. Yes, there it's changing, but the largest part of the area in Europe and in Brazil and everywhere around the world is private land. So we really need to address these landowners much more. And we all know that as a scientist, we produce papers, and this is read by scientists, and this does not come to the land users, and this is a huge problem. So here in Brazil, we have a lot of extensionist organizations. In Europe, they also exist, but still it is very, very complicated. I think in all environmental issues, and soil certainly, as you said, Diana, is not this is not interesting for people. They don't it's hard to grasp the importance of soil. And the question that once degraded, it is so difficult to restore soil. So I work with restoration. I work with the plant parts. That's the easiest part. Once the soils are degraded in whichever way, it will be a lot more complicated and a lot more expensive also. So I think really that both in Europe and in Brazil and all over the world, we need to learn ways how to communicate this much better and find efficient ways to do so. And so this is crucial for environmental problems. And this is why also I like to always discuss this question of beyond conservation units, because conservation units are just one small part of the land and often not even sufficient, and never sufficient to guarantee the ecosystem services. They're usually designed to protect biodiversity or maybe some landscapes that are special for, but not designed to preserve ecosystem services. That has to happen all over the area. So we really need to talk with land users.
Yeah, I'm just going to tell everybody, please, you are welcome to join the talk. We're just 14 people, so if you raise your hand or if you want to talk, I can unmute you and open the camera. Just remember that this video is being recorded and it's going to be uploaded in the YouTube channel of Lima Consultancy. Okay, so Tiana?
So yes, we kind of struggle a little bit to talk with the population, the citizen, let's say, on this matter, the landowners and how difficult they are. But we are doing efforts, like I told you before, Claudia, on trying to insert knowledge on soil in education throughout several other units or things that they already study to try to have a better knowledge in an early stage. It's hard. It's a very big work to do, but we are working on that. And we have, under the Mission Soil, we have developed not only research projects to address the policy needs, but we also developed something very interesting, which are called the lighthouses. So the lighthouses basically should show what is the best achievable soil in your zone, in your area, keeping in mind the variety of things you can have and showing you a good example. And the people, the citizens, can go to these places and perhaps get a glimpse of how the level they can achieve if they have sustainable measures in comparison with the reality they always knew of degradation. For instance, in Portugal, there's an area that has been always in the south of Portugal. It is quite difficult to have some type of species there, but it's its kind, and that there's some issues of degradation, and people have this in mind that it's a degraded landscape, and they need to help the soil, more fertilizer, more this, more that, to actually have their own production. Well, the other side that we are going to show, try to show with the lighthouses, are how implement the best practices and to try to reveal the best soils, the good examples, the ones that the farmers and the citizens should aim for. Of course, this is very utopic. I know we will always have difficulties, but we are making an effort to try to get into the cities, and we have projects with the citizen science also where they participate and they can contribute. We hope to gather this information and also put it side by side to our scientific papers in ESDAC, as also there are other sources of data that we are trying to get. But it's indeed one step further to try to go into a more sustainable way. But still, 62% of our soils, it's a lot, but we need to try it and we need to progress. That is the whole idea.
Yeah, so I was actually going to talk about it. So you have 40,000 sampling points, and you're still lagging behind a bit on urban areas and forests. And yeah, do you have a limit of points to sample? This is one question. The second question is, how do you think the balance will shift, if it will shift, when you add the points from the urban areas and the forested areas?
Well, like every institution, we have a budgetary limit. Like every scientific project, everybody has a limit on their amount of things they can do, period. So we go to the limit of our budgetary limits to try to do our best. And yes, the same applies to member states. So if you think about the law that is being created now, it's in theory and according to the latest alterations, I don't know if people are aware, but this is like a peer review. No, the commission, the author sends a law for approval, and the council and the parliament give their answer. If these changes are implemented, we can progress. I can kind of accept this, and we entered into this revision 3 process, let's say trilogue, that was the last week, and we are currently with the document full of amendments to be implemented. So it can shift a little bit from here and there. So there is one thing, and here goes the part that we, Lucas, are going to contribute with some of the points for the monitoring of member states. So we contribute there. But there are the points, the indicators that the soil monitoring law needs, and there are all the other indicators that we'll need for the development. And as you know, a forest are has a different needs of degradation than an urban area and an agricultural area. We have to measure everything until we are finally able to create some level of profiles to see what is better to measure in where. We know in a very rough manner how most of the degradation is spread, how most of what influence more in each area, but we need to be sure that, for instance, I was asked very often, why do I need to see salinity in other areas that are not coastal areas, for instance, or have irrigation problems? And apparently, perhaps we thought that there are some issues going with drought and identified in other global assessments that might indicate that we might have other issues here. So we are going to measure it at least one time, the first time, and then we can be more efficient in this assessment. And this is where Lucas is the most important, right? We do small study cases within our 41,000 points with lower budget, and we assess. We are making a huge effort, for instance, for pollution. We are going to assess PFAS. We are going to assess microplastics, for instance, but they need to be in a smaller number of samples so that we know our methodology is okay, is going to give us the answers we need, etc., etc. So it's a case-by-case type of approach. And then it depends on the funding that is attributed to us. So to reply to you directly, let us assess them. Every time we get more funding, we try to get other areas, but always keep in mind the past areas to keep the trend analysis. Let us include more indicators with time and adjust the metrics as we go. But still, it's a case-by-case study thing.
Yeah, so that is quite nice to understand that it's not a fixed uh, phrase or fixed sentences inside the legislation, which actually is a directive. And being a directive, it has much more flexibility for I wouldn't say change, but improvements than a legislation. So the steps to get more improvements according to the development of the science and also the small case studies that you do, it's much easier. So this is something that I hear a lot from people that are working directly or indirectly with the soil monitoring laws that, well, it's going to be a fixed fix that cannot be changed, and we'll be stuck with this for the rest of, I don't know, like 30 years within the program of the European Union now. So this is not true, which is quite nice to put it out for people to understand, and perhaps we can gain more supporters for this legislation, which is quite important. And now I think we are starting to move to an end. So, Jenna, well, you have to say.
You see, I was just going to add here something that it might be fundamental for your interpretation of the thing of the law. It is expected to be evaluated 6 years after it's fully implemented. So we will have to go back to the data and tell, say, these are the indicators we want to keep, these are the indicators we want to add, these are, it's like let's reevaluate, and this is what is going to go further. And yes, it's somehow a reassurance, but we still need to get the data first and be able to provide everything in due time for this reevaluation. But I'm very glad it has one reevaluation after this 5-6 years after implementation. It's a very good approach, I would say.
Yeah, so I think we are moving to the end now. Um, there were some common topics within the talks. So fire, um, conservation or hazard. Um, we have what is actually conservation in the sense of, is it a fixed term, or it can be adjusted to different biomes and different realities, without forgetting that culture plays a big role in everything, even concerning our soil law, because you have different countries within the European Union that have different ways to use their land, which is ingrained in their culture. So if you talk about pedoclimatic zones without talking about the culture, nothing will be implemented. So it's the case of the pampas. You have to take into consideration the gaucho culture, which is very strong there. And by doing this flexibilities within conservation, within changing paradigms of, for example, fire as a hazard to fire as an ally, you can change, you can encompass and make your actions broader in the sense of conservation. Legislation, the soil legislation here, it's depending on data. It's the same as the pampas, the grass pampas. So everything is data, we should know. Also, the legislation is not a fixed thing. It's dynamic and it's vibrant and encompasses different aspects to promote the implementation and the monitoring and the knowledge about our soils. Because without knowledge, we cannot preserve. So that's it. That was our first webinar. And I think that despite being different continents, we have a lot in common. And this webinar was recorded, is going to be uploaded in our YouTube channel. So it's for free. Please, Gerhard, show it to your students. Gianna, if you want to use it also as a tool to inform a society, please do the editing you need. And I would like to thank everybody for being here, participating on this nice discussion from different continents. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure. Pleasure to meet you too, Gianna.
Yeah.
Thank you, Klaus.
Likewise. It was very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.